3 disturbing true stories. Story 1. The Watcher. This first story takes place in the fall of 2021, when I was 27 years old and living alone for the very first time. I'd just moved into a rented townhouse in southern Illinois after going through a difficult breakup. I thought the solitude would help me process everything I'd been through. The townhouse was part of a small row of identical units. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. It sat in a peaceful cul-de-sac just off a rural highway. The neighborhood had that typical suburban feel. Beige vinyl siding, perfectly trimmed hedges, wind chimes, and mailboxes with family names stenciled on them. Most of my neighbors were older folks, with a few young families mixed in. I didn't know anyone well, and honestly, I preferred it that way. But almost immediately, I noticed one person who stood out from the rest. He lived 3 doors down, a tall, heavy-set man, probably in his mid-40s, with a scruffy beard. What made him unusual was his strange habit of standing outside his house at night. Sometimes he'd pace around, sometimes he'd smoke, but often he'd just stand there doing absolutely nothing, just staring. I'd pull into my driveway after work around 9 or 10 p.m. and there he'd be, leaning against his porch rail or standing at the edge of his driveway, facing the street. He never waved, never smiled. He just stared, even when I looked directly at him. I tried to ignore it. When I mentioned it to friends and family, they suggested maybe he was just a night owl or had insomnia. But there was something deeply unsettling about him. It wasn't just that he was always there, it was the complete stillness. He didn't fidget, check his phone, or shift his weight. He stood there like a statue, always watching, but never participating. I told myself not to be paranoid, but as time passed, that gnawing feeling in my gut only grew stronger. Then the noises started. It was around mid-September when I first heard it. I'd just gotten home from my late shift at the distribution center, where I managed inventory. I usually got in around 10:30 p.m., exhausted and ready to crash. That night, I fell asleep around midnight. At exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke up to a sound I can only describe as metal scraping against wood. At first, I thought I'd dreamed it, but then I heard it again. A long, slow creaking noise, like an old gate opening. My bedroom was on the first floor at the back of the unit, with a sliding glass door that led to a small fenced backyard. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened carefully. There was a pause. Then I heard footsteps, soft crunching sounds like someone walking slowly across gravel. My entire backyard was lined with decorative rock instead of grass, so every footstep was clearly audible. These weren't animal sounds. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed. I didn't have any real weapons, just a dull kitchen knife I kept in my nightstand, which felt pretty ridiculous at the time. I crouched by the edge of the window and peeked through the blinds. I couldn't see anything. The motion light wasn't on, which meant either they were out of range or had found another way in. I dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm, took my address, and told me officers were on their way. I stayed crouched in the dark, barely breathing. About 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flickered through my front window. I opened the door and met 2 officers outside. I explained everything, what I'd heard and when it started. One officer walked around back while the other stayed with me, asking questions. The officer in the yard came back and said the gate was closed with no signs of tampering, but he'd write up a report just in case. They hadn't seen anyone, no footprints or damage. Basically, no crime had been committed. One of them actually said, "Probably just a raccoon," and gave me a look that clearly said I was wasting their time. I didn't argue. They left after about 10 minutes, and I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I went outside to check the backyard myself. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a flat stone about the size of a paperback book, wedged under the bottom edge of the wooden fence gate. I hadn't noticed it before. The gate had a heavy spring that made it swing closed automatically, but the stone looked like it had been placed there specifically to stop it from closing all the way. It was subtle, like something someone would do if they wanted to come back later and slip in without making noise. I picked up the rock and tossed it across the yard. I called the police again and told them what I'd found. They said they'd note it in the report, but again, there wasn't much they could do. When I asked if they could talk to neighbors or check for cameras, they said no, unless a crime was actually committed, they couldn't investigate. I felt like I was losing my mind. 2 nights later, it escalated. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up again, this time to the sound of my back door handle turning. The handle rattled gently at first, like someone testing it, then harder, like someone trying to force it open. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I could feel someone standing on the other side. My mouth went dry. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called the police again. While I waited, I crouched in the hallway, out of view. I didn't have a gun or a dog, just that stupid kitchen knife. My motion light clicked on, and through a tiny gap in the blinds, I saw a shadow move across the window. It was definitely a man. He didn't run or try to hide when the light came on. He just stood there. The same 2 officers showed up again. This time they actually found footprints in the gravel, big ones leading right up to the door. But again, they said since no entry had been made, there wasn't enough evidence to go on. They promised to patrol the area more often and told me to keep my doors locked. The next day, I installed cameras, one above the back door and another above the front porch. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the live feed on my phone. 2:14 a.m. came and went. Nothing happened. Then, at 2:23, the back camera triggered. A man stepped into frame. He walked in through the gate like he knew exactly how to move to avoid the motion sensor until the last second. He was tall and broad, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans and gloves. He walked up to the door, looked up directly at the camera and smiled, a slow, stretched out grin that made my blood run cold. Then he backed up, still staring, and disappeared into the darkness. I called the police again. They came back, watched the clip, and admitted that yes, it was unsettling. But since he didn't break in, didn't damage property, and didn't appear to be armed, there was allegedly still nothing they could do. They wouldn't even ask the guy down the street to check his doorbell camera. I begged them, but they said their hands were tied. That night, I packed a bag and slept at a hotel. When I came back the next day, I found 4 muddy handprints on the glass door, 2 high up and 2 low, like someone had crouched down and just rested their hands there for a while, staring in. I moved out a week later. I broke my lease and forfeited my deposit. I didn't care. I couldn't stay there another night. The final straw was the note I found wedged in my mailbox the day I left. It was handwritten in small cramped letters on lined notebook paper. It said, "The cops leave, but I don't." I filed one last report. The officer I spoke to that time looked genuinely disturbed by the note and promised they'd do a wellness check on the neighborhood. But it was too late. I never went back. About a month later, I got a message on Facebook from a girl named Kayla. She said she was the new tenant who had moved into the unit after me. Her message said, "Hi, sorry to bother you. I think you used to live here. Did you ever have someone in a black hoodie hanging around the backyard? I keep hearing footsteps at night, and last night someone knocked on the glass door around 2 a.m. and just stood there." I didn't reply. I didn't want to know what happened next. Story 2. The phone calls. For my second story, I need to give you some background about my job. I work for a property preservation company. Basically, we handle foreclosed homes. We secure them, clean them out, winterize them, and sometimes even board them up if there's been vandalism. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well. And for the most part, it's quiet. You spend a lot of time alone in houses that used to belong to people who are long gone. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's boring. But every once in a while, you get a house that feels genuinely unsettling. This happened in 2020 when I was assigned to clear out a property in a rural part of upstate New York. It was one of those dying towns, only one gas station, half the businesses shuttered, roads cracked and overgrown. The house itself was a small, one-story place off a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown brush and woods on 3 sides. No other homes nearby, just trees and silence. According to the file, the house had been foreclosed after the owner, an elderly woman, passed away, and no heirs had stepped forward to claim the estate. The utilities had been shut off for over a year. Our job was to catalogue any remaining property, empty it out, and secure it for winter. I drove up on a Monday morning around 9 a.m. with a small box truck and all my gear. From the outside, the house looked intact. Windows closed, door locked, roof fine. Just a lot of weeds and vines climbing up the porch. I had to shove the front door open because it had swollen in the frame, but once inside, everything looked pretty standard. Dusty, stale air, and faded furniture. Then my work phone rang. It startled me because I had no signal out there. I'd already checked and noticed I had no bars, but the phone buzzed anyway. There was no number on the caller ID. It just said, "Unknown caller." I answered, and there was nothing. Just a low crackling sound like static. I said hello twice, then hung up and chalked it up to a glitch. I got to work. I always start with photos, documenting every room and every item. The living room was cluttered with old furniture, lace curtains, and framed paintings. It reminded me of my grandmother's house. Heavy furniture, doilies, porcelain figures. The hallway had a smell, not rot, more like mildew and dust and something faintly metallic. There were 3 bedrooms. One had been stripped bare except for a sagging mattress on the floor. Another was clearly a sewing room, with thread spools everywhere and a dusty machine on the desk. I took a closer look and saw a corkboard filled with old newspaper clippings. They were mostly obituaries, dozens of them, all clipped out with scissors and pinned carefully to the board. No names I recognized, but all local. In the master bedroom, there was a rotary phone on the nightstand. I remember stopping and staring at it for a second because I hadn't seen one in years. It was off-white, yellowed with age, with a long coiled cord. The kind of phone that would never ring again because the line had been cut long ago. I moved on to the bathroom. That's when my phone rang again. It said, "Unknown caller" again. This time I hesitated before picking up. I stepped out into the hallway and answered. Again, nothing at first. But this time, after about 5 seconds, I heard a whisper, very soft, so quiet I could barely make it out. It said, "Don't answer the phone in the bedroom." Then the line went dead. I stood there frozen, heart pounding. The house was dead silent. I checked the windows, all closed, nobody outside, no sign of forced entry. My first thought was that someone was pranking me. Maybe one of the other crew guys was messing with me. But no one else knew I was there that early, and again I had no signal. I checked my phone, 1 bar, then nothing, like it flickered in and out of existence. I tried calling my supervisor, but the call failed. I decided to finish the job quickly. I started boxing up loose items in the living room, books, figurines, dusty glassware. But the whole time, I felt off, like I was being watched. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing there. Then the phone rang a third time. But not my phone, the rotary phone in the bedroom. I heard it from across the house, a shrill, mechanical ring that echoed through the rooms. That phone should have been dead. The line was disconnected, no dial tone, no service. But there it was, ringing like an old-fashioned bell. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the bedroom, phone still in my hand. It rang again and again. I stepped into the doorway, and there it was. The phone sat on the nightstand, the receiver trembling slightly with each ring. There was no chance I was picking up that phone. The rings eventually stopped. I backed out of the room. I wanted to leave, but part of my job was securing the property, and I still had to check the basement. I almost said screw it, but something made me keep going. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I just didn't want to admit how scared I was. The basement door was in the kitchen. I opened it slowly. The stairs creaked as I stepped down, flashlight in hand. I smelled mold and something like rust. There were shelves along the wall filled with old paint cans and some broken furniture. In the back corner, there was a small table. On it was a cordless phone, a newer model, grey plastic, covered in dust, and next to it, a stack of yellowed notebooks. I picked one up and flipped through it. Each page had a name, a date, and a short sentence. Lena H., July 3rd, 2019, rang once, didn't answer. Carl M., September 12th, 2019, picked up, warned him. It was more like this, dozens of entries. I dropped the notebook, and my heart felt like it completely fell out of my body. I looked around the basement, fearing I wasn't alone down there, that someone was watching me from the dark corners. I rushed back up the stairs, looking behind me the whole time, heart in my throat. I didn't finish the job. I drove straight back to the office and turned in my report. I didn't tell them everything. I just said the property was unsafe and possibly had squatters or interference. They reassigned the job to another crew. 2 days later, I got a text from one of the other guys, Mark. He'd gone out there that morning to finish what I'd started. I hadn't told him specifically what had happened. His message said, "The phone in the bedroom with no service rang while I was in there. What the hell?" I called his work cell immediately, and he told me he didn't answer the phone in the house because he was too freaked out. The next day, Mark quit without notice and never returned to work. He's not dead or anything. I looked him up on Facebook eventually, and he's posted stuff since then. But I never spoke to him again. I don't know what else he saw in that house, but it must have been something bad enough for him to want to distance himself from the job entirely. My boss did call the police to report potential squatters after Mark quit, but they found nobody inside the house. Everything about that place, from its isolated location to its eerie, dilapidated interior, to the phone calls to my cell and that voice on the line and that damn house phone ringing, it felt like I'd stumbled into a legitimate horror movie. I swear it had to be one of two things, an elaborate, sick prank or an equally elaborate trap. What do you think happened in these situations? Have you ever experienced anything similar? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories.